and also engaged in a fair bit of physiology and stuff. My son is, who I lean on a little bit for some of this information, is a researcher in the strength and injury prevention area. So I'm pretty engaged and fairly in depth in this whole area. And so what I'm trying to do today was pretty much just explain to people, or give people an understanding of what plyometrics are, what different activities they are, what sort of loads are involved, what sort of speeds are involved in the various activities, and how they may apply to the individual events that you coach. So if you've got that information, there's lots of stuff on plyometrics on the internet and stuff. So you know, everyone will have seen bounding and hopping and jumping and standing jumps and all the rest of it. So I didn't just want to go over that area again. I wanted to go something which is a little bit more in depth for you. So I guess we're here to try and answer these questions. So what's the relationship between plyometrics and performance? And that's really the time-force relationships rather than much research that's been done in that area. So what physiological changes do plyometric activities induce? How do these changes improve jumping performance? How we can modify a technical model to magnify the physiological changes achieved through plyometrics. We get into the time space there, squeezing time. How do we periodise plyometric activities across the year? And then can we manage a gradual progressive overload in volume, intensity, duration, frequency, recovery, regeneration, etc. in our plyometrics program? So hopefully come out of the end of this with a little bit better understanding in those areas. So first of all, plyos are used for specific physical conditioning for the jumps events. So the first question we'll ask is, what are the specific physical demands of the jumps we're trying to condition for? So long jump takeoff, speed of approach for men is 10.6 to 11.2 metres a second. We have athletes in our country that can run at that speed. Women are 9.5 to 10, and we have the same. The ranges of movement, that is his hip to the ground, hip to heel angle, is around about 30 degrees in long jump. And that isn't a problem being at that far in front. It's more the positions that the jumper is in terms of being shoulder over hip, over swing leg, knee, and reducing the moment of inertia of this swing leg by bringing that foot a little bit further forward. This was 10 stride jump for Henry. And the peak vertical forces during takeoff are around 20 times body weight. So the faster the approach in the run up, or the faster the approach in the run into any plyometric activity or any jump activity, the higher the forces are. Long jumping carries the highest forces of any of the activities. Triple jump. So the runway speeds for men, you can read them at 10.5 speed into the hop and about 9.6 metres a second coming out of the hop. So lose about a metre a second in that hop transition. That's Christian Taylor in 2015. Ground contact times in the hop are about 0.12 seconds. The speed into the step is about 8.6 and the ground contact time 0.16, and then into the jump at 6.9 the ground contact time is 0.18. You see the ground contact time increasing as the speed decreases. For women, they're just graded down, so they're about 9.4 on the runway. And the problem we have at the moment when I look at the data for many of the jumpers, the girls we have in Australia at the moment, none of them can run over 9 metres a second. So we're really struggling to begin with. Our triple jump girls are not fast enough. We maybe need to look for another model or look to do other things to focus a little bit more on their speed. Speed at the hop is 8.4. Our girls are running at about 8.7 to 8.9. Ground contact time is 0.12, same. Into the step it's 7.9. Won't dwell too much on that. And as you can see, as they get slower through the phases, it takes longer. That's Christian again on his step jump angle, step jump contact. You can see the contacts here This is a problem for our jumpers as well. So you see, this is not too different from a long jump takeoff. Shoulder over hip over knee. This is the coming out of, that's landing at the hop. His toes maybe just off the ground. The positions are really key because that position shortens the contact time. It's really, if you land, you have triple jumpers landing with their leg, swing leg way back here, or you're doing that in bounding, you're doing long contact times. You don't want to have the leg way back or very low when you're doing it. And many of our jumpers, including the jumpers that I coach, are similar. Something we work to try and change. So the angles of takeoff, lower in the step than they are in the hop because of the forces involved. Peak vertical forces are around 17 times body weight in a hop, 16 times in the step, even though everybody at triple jumps would swear to you that that's the biggest load in the contacts across the forces, and the jump it's about 14 times body weight. The forces are very much related to speed. So high jump, young Oscar. Approach speed for high jumpers is between 7 and 8.5 metres a second. The women it's 6 to 7.5. Movement range, swing leg is that's a little bit far back. He's normally in a similar position to the long jumpers here. So swing leg knee would be a bit further forward and the shoulders would be a little bit more vertical at that takeoff. Leaning back also makes you spend a lot more time on the ground, and therefore yet the forces are absorbed over a longer period of time. Takeoff time is 0.13 to 0.16 seconds. So this kid jumped 225 recently. Contact time was 0.13. So Starkey also runs in really fast and has very short contact time as well. Shorter the contact time, the higher the impulse and the higher that you're likely to be able to jump. The peak forces are 16 to 18 times body weight and 15 to 17 times body weight for the women. It's only in that space of time, 0.13 to 0.15 a second. So just to go through, for those who don't have a background in exercise science area, eccentric contraction is where the muscle fibres lengthen under tension, and that results in lengthening of the whole muscle. And concentric contraction is where the fibres shorten under tension, right? And it shortens the entire muscle length. If myofibrils, if they pull apart like that in lengthening, then they can't go back together. And so the body builds another one in between in that recovery. That's what finishes up, it causes muscle soreness. So you'll get fluid in the muscle, and as a result of that you get muscle soreness. There's no isometric contraction. There's some suggestion, I know there's a Dutch guy around it that runs around the country and the world and lectures, but it talks about isometric contraction of hamstring muscles. That's all they do is contract isometrically. That's incorrect. You can't get muscle soreness. All your athletes, first time you run them fast or first time they do Nordics, they get sore, right? You can only get sore by pulling these apart. So you've actually had muscle lengthening, right? You've had eccentric contraction. So the theory of isometric contraction is just that, it's a theory. It's not, mind you, so is what I'm telling you now. So the definition of plyometric activities are their dynamic muscle activities with an eccentric contraction followed almost immediately by a concentric contraction. They're stretch shortening cycle activities, so I'll refer a fair bit for the rest of this presentation to SSC activities. And they're defined in the literature as slow, that is those activities that have a duration of eccentric concentric of longer than 0.35 of a second, or fast, which is shorter than 0.35 of a second. But this is still, when we look at some of the activities, there's a huge range of forces incrementally increasing as you get faster. So just going, we'll use a slower activity, okay, now time to move to fast activities, is not very good in terms of load management because there is too great a variation in the forces. So we go from relatively low forces to very high ones. To manage the load, then start with slow activities and gradually build across the conditioning period to faster ones that involve higher forces. As the stretch shortening cycle becomes faster and the force is higher, reduce the number of contacts per session. So that's what we do in all of our training. As we increase intensity, we reduce volume. And it's the same thing in plyometrics. Those of you, again, a little bit of physiology. So it's Heinemann's model or hierarchical model of muscle fibre recruitment. So this is what happens, and it's good for coaches to understand this if you're getting into the strength training space, because it has huge implications for what you do in strength training or even in bounding. So different types of muscle fibres are recruited in order of their physiological characteristics and according to increases forces required. So the recruitment comes via the motor units through the central nervous system. So you have big motor units and small motor units, and motor units in between. The big motor units recruit the fast twitch type 2B fibres, and the smaller ones recruit your slow twitch fibres, and those in between recruit the fibres in between. So for forces up to 50%, your maximum voluntary contraction, the slow twitch fibres are preferentially recruited in increasing numbers as the force required progressively increases. So if I'm walking, or I'm walking faster, or I'm jogging faster, it increases the number of slow twitch fibres I'm going to, my body recruits. When the force required increases above 50% and up to 75%, these are rough figures, the muscle type 2A fibres are then progressively recruited in numbers in addition to all of the slow twitch fibres. As the required force increases above 75% and up to 100%, it's your maximum contraction, maximum force that you can apply. Type 2B fibres are then progressively recruited in numbers in addition to all of the slow twitch fibres and all of the fast twitch 2A fibres. So you progressively increase, you recruit first of all your slow twitch, then when you can't apply enough force, then you start to you recruit fast twitch 2A, and when you can't, you need more force still, you start to recruit fast twitch 2B. The important thing to understand then is unless you're working in that 75 to 100% range of force required in the activities that you're doing, be it in the gym or anywhere else, you're not recruiting the fibre types that you're trying to develop to get better. So they're the fibres, they're the really explosive muscle fibres that provide the highest levels of forces, make you run fastest, jump higher, further, etc. So how stretch shortening cycles improve jump performance? So these activities play a role in improving the rate of force development in the muscle. They do this by improving eccentric and concentric force potential without hypertrophy. They do this in a plyometric activities, do this because the time under tension is so short that you don't get muscle hypertrophy from doing these activities. So if you want to get muscle hypertrophy, you want to hypertrophy these fibres, the higher level fibres, then you have to spend time under tension, provide them with time under tension in order to get them to hypertrophy. So the faster stretch shortening cycle activities build sarcomeres in series. These are sarcomeres are contractile units rather than in parallel. So it builds them end on end, right? Which means that the muscle becomes longer and can contract further, can apply more force. If you do, you build muscle fibres in parallel by doing lots of activity, short activity, then you'll build the muscles, the sarcomeres side by side, like this. So the muscle, you will see this in the gym, the muscle gets bigger. They all walk around like this because they're building sarcomeres in parallel rather than in series. For sport, we need to build them in series, especially for high performance sport, which involves a lot of speed and a lot of power. They trigger the rates of firing of the larger motor units in the muscle that activate the type 2B fibres. Improvements in stiffness of the muscle, and this is something else again, something different. I just threw it in. So improvements in the stiffness of the muscle tendon complex come from heavy, slow, eccentric training, which can hypertrophy the type 2A and type 2B fibres. They need to spend time under tension. The loads need to be very heavy. So all the evidence from the research and the reviews of all the research studies. My son threw one at me the other day. He's got a PhD student doing some stuff at the moment. That is how you build hypertrophy. And if you can hypertrophy those fibres, it's like having a thicker piece of rope. All right? You've got a thicker piece of rope because they then have more sarcomeres built in those fibres, and they can apply a greater force. All right? So there are two elements to getting more explosive, faster, building the stiffness of the muscle tendon complex from heavy, slow, eccentric stuff, which can hypertrophy those fibres and improving their force output in that way. That quality doesn't come from the use of plyometric training. It can't come from the use of plyometric training. Plyometric training is too short a time period. Right? And when you get in the weight room, moving weights fast is a waste of time in terms of doing what you're trying to do here. Because you shorten the time, rather than hypertrophy, rather than having longer time under tension, you shorten the time interval by moving something faster. Certainly it generates more force, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's building the muscle or building what you want. And, you know, our role as coaches is to build athletes, is to take an athlete, look at them, what they may need to do, and then build that athlete into a performance model that allows them to handle the task of their event better. What is the rate of force development? So that's the speed at which the contractile elements in the muscle can develop force. And that means more motor units or bigger motor units being used to recruit these. The rate of force development is directly linked to better jump and sprint performances, with a faster rate of force development producing better performances. The rate of force development occurs across the stretch shortening cycle period, from eccentric to concentric, and larger ranges of movement means slower. So if you have a larger range of movement, or you have a larger range of movement in a bound or a jump or whatever it may be, means a lower rate of force development. So the bigger the movement, the bigger the range of movement, the less the rate of force development there is across that particular movement. So if a run or a jump, a ground contact can be modified in any way to reduce the range. The rate of force development will be higher if maximum eccentric strength and stiffness of the muscle tendon are high enough to tolerate the forces that are going to be encountered. Right, so we try to shorten things up. So I talked the other day about running technique in the long jump presentation, about the importance of shortening of the contact position, body position, trunk position, in shortening the time on the ground that the athlete has. Now, it's important to increase the muscle stiffness. It's important to improve the rate of firing of the big motor units to preferentially recruit those fibres. But if you can squeeze time, you increase impulse. So impulse is force times time, not power. A lot of people talk about power. Power is not the measurement that's of any consequence to us in athletic performance. It's impulse. So impulse is essentially, if you just think of it this way, it's the rate of acceleration in a movement. It's the rate of acceleration. So the faster the rate of acceleration, the higher the impulse, the better the performance. An increase in the rate of force development of the muscle and a reduction in the range leads to faster stretch shortening cycles and a reduction in ground contact times. Just repeating myself. This results in an increase in the rate of acceleration as total time is shortened in the movement. So impulse is increased as a result. Impulse is the important measure, not force, in jumping, and same thing in sprinting. Certainly top speed sprinting, maybe not quite in acceleration. There are powers probably has a bigger role to play in acceleration. And the small reductions in ground contact time can lead to significant improvements in impulse and therefore in the performance of the athlete. Load management. So we get into these activities, we need to manage the load that we're dealing with here. The plyometric activities are very short stretch shortening cycles, should always be used judiciously in the training environment because of the high forces in most. So there are short stretch shortening cycle in a sprint, in a ground contact in a sprint, is about 4 times body weight. It's not high, it's not super high, but as soon as you try and change what you're going to do on the next movement, so you're going to take off or something like that, then the foot needs to be further out in front and the forces are much higher. The training principle of gradual progressive overload needs to be adhered to in relation to the volume, intensity and frequency of the activities used, along with the recovery between efforts and the regeneration periods between sessions. So for these types of activities, for heavy strength training sessions, heavy eccentric strength training sessions, 72 hours is required for recovery before you do the next session. Otherwise you don't get adaptation. You just get gradual spiralling downwards and training those fibres toward endurance because they haven't recovered. They can't do what you want them to do the next time round. It's the same thing with plyometric activities. You need a longer time period between what you do. So 72 hours, 3 days, maybe. I've always struggled to get good athletes to do quality bounding sessions more than 1 day a week. So 72 hours is the theoretical model, but not necessarily going to recover in that period of time. And so it becomes a coach's eye thing, and talking to your athletes as to whether they're okay to do another jump session. So we used to do, in the Bronwyn Thompson day, 2 long jump sessions a week. She was just a rock, like could do anything. And she would tolerate 2 hard jumping sessions a week. But I've had many athletes that couldn't tolerate 2 hard jumping sessions a week. Right? So it depends on the athlete that you're dealing with. Sometimes the very high level athletes can cope with a little bit more. But anyway, you just need to, I guess it becomes a judgment that the coach has to make in those things. So as a general guide, the activities with faster approach speeds leading into the ground contacts have a shorter stretch shortening cycle and higher forces. So let's start to look at some of these activities, the general principles. So standing jumps have a stretch shortening cycle time of about 500 milliseconds, and they involve about 4 to 5 times body weight to accelerate the body upwards or forwards. They're categorised as slow because they're under 0.35 of a second. These jumps reflect maximum leg strength levels, and results will indicate improving leg strength in the gym. So if you've got a good strength program happening in the gym, you find your standing long jump and standing triple jump and those sorts of activities start to get better. They have a poor correlation with running jump performance, but have reasonable correlation with acceleration. So where it's slightly slower, there's a bit more time on the ground, like a bit more force required, then they're more relevant to that part of the performance than they are to the actual very high top speed stuff. They're good early conditioning phase and development level athlete training activities. They can be used to monitor leg strength levels of the athletes and also to identify strength training needs in developing jumpers. So you can see how an athlete can cope with a standing jump, as to say, well, maybe they're not ready for this yet, or they need a whole lot more core type activities and other strengthening, postural strength in order to be able to cope with those activities. So they're very good. If you start with standing jumps, you get a pretty good idea. Are they ready to move on, or they're not ready to move on? Let's just keep them there for a while until they're ready to go. So that's just some examples of a few of these things. So, standing vertical jump, counter movement jump is pretty well publicised at about 500 milliseconds. Standing high jump, scissors clearance, standing long jump, overhead shot, underarm shot, they're all still somewhat plyometric activities. Most of these things are double leg activities. Just a variety of these things, if you have them in your training program, is good for the athletes. It improves their coordination, and it's more interesting to do. So we'll use these things in training, and then we measure them, and we have competitions with them all the time. So training in my group is mostly they turn up, they rock up for a competition almost every day. My young man Henry Frayne, I think I said this will work. There we go. This is Cologne in about 2011, I think. It's a little bit lighter there. See the good extension that you get in this type of movement? That's just a standing long jump. So it's all about these activities are used to train the muscles for performance. They're not, sure we use them as an activity in themselves. We have competitions with these things. So the best one we have, I think, in Australian men at the moment, or across time, has been around 350 or 51, I think, Andrew, for Teddy. Shervo was 350, Mitchell Watt was 359, Henry Frayne's 348, 46 for Nofke. They're all, the higher level athletes are in that space. Nah has the best of the girls that we've seen in the jumps area with 296, I think, Andrew, 296. And we've got another one at 280. Bronwyn Thompson was only, we didn't do a lot of this, but she was in the 275, 278, I think, was her PB in standing long jump. Not super. So the medium fast activity, so you move on in your training program and you gradually build these sorts of activities in there. So the presentation's available and it's available online, so it's better if you if you want to have a look at some of these things, and I'm sure you could probably think of another 30 that could be added to that list there. The general principles of multi-jump, so this is kind of slow medium activities. So from a standing start, they're the kind of next level in plyometrics beyond just the standing single jump. And the stretch shortening cycle for the first takeoff is 0.5 or 500 milliseconds. And as body is accelerated upwards and forwards, then each succeeding contact becomes faster and involves higher forces. The jumps, there's slow medium, forces around 3 to 4 times body weight, and increasing up to 6 to 8 times body weight. So we did some measures on these. We took the national jumps group, not the total, but we took most of the high performance jumpers who would come to Canberra, and we used the force plates in Canberra, which was set up in the old days for a full triple jump, and a lot of them were not very good order, but we managed to get a number of these activities measured. So we actually, these are the numbers that have come out of those sort of studies, or that sort of stuff we did. They reflect maximum leg strength as well as the rate of force development, and can be improved by leg strength activities in gym, but can also be improved by doing the activity itself. So there's not been a lot of research, apart from some of the stuff. So there's not a lot of research on the relationship between those activities and actual performance. There's lots of, my opinion, your opinion, someone else's opinion, that does this, and lots of people making claims. There's not very much research done. So we're trying to get this done as part of our national jumps camps. So we're trying to get numbers to those camps so that we can put them through these sorts of activities and see what the relationship is. So we've been running some of this stuff to this point in time, but we've had problems with the protocol that people use. So you've got to standardise the protocol. Some people want to do stuff off 3 strides, 4 strides, 5 strides, 2 strides. No, I can't do this. I have a standing start. No, I have a rolling start. you can't, that's no good for research. You can't get actual numbers that you can rely on once you start to do those things. So we're trying to standardise those things and get this information. The only information I can tell you that we have at this point in time is the relationship in our jumpers between eccentric hamstring strength and sprint performance, sprinting speed. And there was very strong relationship. It was like 0.8 between an athlete's eccentric hamstring strength measured using a Nordic and their sprinting speed. There's been quite a number of studies in recent times that have shown similar data, similar results. Come on. Stop talking to me. Oh, there we go. So I'll talk a little bit further, a little bit more later on about position. So posture and stuff is really important here. Henry doesn't quite hold his posture, so he gets a little bit. So you need to have your hips square. The athlete needs to have the hips square, level to the front, square and level. So not like this, not like that. So you can be there in the air. Be there in the air, that's fine, but when you come onto the ground, you need to be square. If you don't, then you're going to finish up with back issues. So you can imagine coming down in this position, what it does to some athletes and their back. So you need to be careful and monitor what the athlete is doing technically when they do these activities. All right, just show it to you. Oh, gone. So this is fast activities. So hopping from a 5 metre run up, last few days I got something through from Aspire Centre in Doha about, they did a study on looking at vertical hopping because the physios use it for testing knee strength and regeneration stuff, and horizontal hopping. And they found that the horizontal stuff, the landing produced a much greater force on the knee. So it produced something like the forces at the knee in a horizontal jump landing. On a vertical jump landing, they're the same, they're about the same, a third, a third, a third. In a horizontal jump landing, they're about 2/3 on the landing is around the knee. So you just need to be careful on what you're doing in hopping and how much of that you use. In your bounding is probably more if you're a sprinter, unless you're a triple jumper. As if you're a sprinter, bounding is probably a more effective plyometric activity anyway. Better for hip extension. So bounding from a 5, these are the figures we got out of Canberra when we went to the AIS. So hopping 5 metre run up. So we just said, because they all wanted to go a different number of steps, we said we can have 5 metres, or you can have 10 metres, or you can do standing. So they were 190 milliseconds, 180 milliseconds, 140. Standing triple was 250 early. I think the last contact was a little shorter. High jump from 3 strides is around 200 milliseconds, or 5 strides it's 180. Towing, accelerating with a sled is about 50% body weight is about 250. A depth jump depends on how high you come down from, but 20 to 40 it's shorter, and then when you go up higher it falls into the next category. And there's some of the other activities that we do in jumping. Standing, 2 hops, 2 steps and a jump, and 7s, which are hop, hop, step, step, hop, step, jump. And we do a 2-step and a jump on a box and lots of other. Young Lyra. Oh, didn't work. Sorry.
What are the loads? You're doing like standing triples on a hard surface. Do you find any detriment in that?
No. I mean, it's the same. We don't do it on the road, but that's the same surface that you jump on or run on anyway, Kim. It's it doesn't. We don't do it on the grass. The grass. Very good jumpers don't like the grass very much. If you're not a great bounder and you've got an athlete that's not a great bounder, getting onto the grass is probably a good thing, especially when they're young kids. But the good athletes don't like it because it's unstable. So they really hit the ground hard, heel to toe, and roll off it. And if the grass is a little bit unstable, it causes them issues. They don't like soft surfaces. You know, we often talk. Phil Ado had I had a triple jump spike where they'd taken everything out of the insole and put a carbon fibre insole in. So he had a carbon fibre insole, then he spikes. Then the thing at the bottom, he had nothing else in there. He said I couldn't jump in it, it's too soft. You know? So a lot of good jumpers, you know, I know they have nice shoes with big heels and lovely soft things, and they're probably very good for developing kids, but they cause a problem with.
The grass just prolongs the time on the ground as well.
Yes, yeah, increased. So if you're looking for higher stretch shortening cycles, faster or recruitment of bigger motor units, the harder surface will give you a better result. Yeah. I don't know, I'm going to get this to work here. I tried, no. Oh, there we go. This is 3 hops off 4 steps, I think, 3 steps. See the heel to toe rolling contact? Stable through the movement. If you do all these things, then you'll see things start to improve and you won't get injuries, and if you gradually progress through these things. Tommy Solomon, New South Wales boy, spent 3 or 4 years with us. See the heel to toe? Stable, trunk, good posture. He's a little bit slappy on the ground, but he's technically, it's pretty good what he's doing. You're not going to hurt yourself, or the athlete won't hurt themselves doing that. They hurt themselves when they get in horrible positions, do this sort of thing, and etc. So, here's Tom doing 5 bounds, if I remember. It's a painful physio behind trying to film stuff. See, he's quite square on the ground each time he comes down. Good posture, good contacts. That's the sort of thing you're looking for with jumpers or when doing plyometrics. Sorry, I'm running a little bit slow. I thought I was going to get through this easy. So there are faster activities there. Phil just running with a sled. I need to dig out a lot more film for these guys. Oh, I hate this thing. I can't find it. So I was just going to show his posture when he runs with a sled. And that sled is about 5% of his body weight. So there's a 1780 triple jumper. %5 body weight on that anyway. Improvements in rate of force development increase muscle tendon stiffness, enhance muscle force production via changes in muscle fibre type and or type area from type 1 to type 2A, and increases in neural drive, that's through larger motor units during the early phases of the stretch shortening cycle, so recruitment from larger motor units. In contrast, rate of force development may be negatively affected by changes in muscle fibre type from type 2B to 2A. And that's brought about by endurance efforts in training with too short a rest period between or too short a rest recovery period between sessions, so they don't recover properly. You're trying to train something here that's explosive. It needs recovery. You can't, if you want to do this sort of stuff, it needs good recovery between, otherwise it won't adapt. You'll adapt the wrong way. So endurance bounding, not for me, amongst some of those things, although there are lots of people who do it and have done it. Improving the rate of force development in muscles, many forms of training can increase the rate of force development in untrained individuals. So doing cleans, you'll read lots of stuff on the internet and dodgy research. However, only eccentric resistance training and ballistic training have been shown in controlled studies to improve that quality in trained athletes. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with trained athletes. We're not dealing with university students who've put their hand up, for a bag of lollies to go and take part in a study. We're dealing with athletes that are trying to, at the high end. So consequently, the training program for explosive events where rate of force development is important. Those two aspects need to be prioritised. Other ways to overload, you can, so we do vertical and horizontal overloading. The vertical forces involved in stretch shortening cycle activities can be increased by adding a weight vest. We suggest adding no more than 3 to 5% of body weight. We've done high-speed filming on this for people running at speed, this is. And once it gets above 5%, we see that people start to lose. We've had difficulties with posture and stuff. I think we're getting the result that we were wanting to get out of it. So we used heavier loads in sprinting and jumping and found they caused unwanted changes in posture and technique. And then the horizontal overload is with the use of a sled. So horizontal overload is when you contact the ground, there's a resistance behind you. And then we add 10 to 15% of body weight in horizontal overload for faster running. Now for acceleration work, people will add a lot more than that, and there's research around it shown that acceleration has been improved by adding 40 and 50% body weight to a sled. Trey Williams. So some guidelines. The length of the approach run is a reliable guide to speed at takeoff, and this is a good guide for the coach in determining the forces involved. Gradually condition the athletes to the forces of plyometric activities, and then progressing through standing jumps, multi-jumps from a standing start, then 2-stride, 4-stride and 6-stride approach runs across a significant number of weeks. And maybe with young kids you don't ever get there, it might take you a couple of years. Only expose your athlete to the very fastest stretch shortening cycle activities off approaches of 10 stride and above when you decide they are technically sound and after they've been through a comprehensive conditioning process. Now they are just, again, through some stuff we've done in looking at how fast an athlete is running after a certain number of strides. So standing jump and acceleration, when we look at an athlete accelerating out of blocks, they accelerate out at about 3 or 4 metres per second. So they're coming out of blocks at about 3 metres a second. So a standing jump is about 30% of your max velocity, and it's about 6 times body weight. 2-stride runs are 45%, and they're about 8 times body weight. 4 strides go up to 12 times body weight. 6 strides is 80% of your our maximum runway velocity that we use as a guide in our jumping, and that gets up to 14 times body weight in the stuff that we looked at when we went to the AIS. 10 stride is 90%, and 14 stride, and then we've got 20 strides, about 20%, 20 times body weight. Some guidelines, technical, erect posture of the trunks right from here. No bending at the hips at touchdown, so you don't want people bending, like this when they're doing plyometrics, or we have some that we're doing it when they're triple jumping. Neutral or tucked pelvic position, so that this is tucked under or it's a neutral position, not hitting the ground in the pelvis tilt forward. Shoulders are square to the direction of the movement. You don't want people hitting the ground like this with the shoulders twisted. Hips are square to the direction of travel. Hips are level at touchdown, so they're level at touchdown, they're not down there. Heel to toe rolling contacts, not ball of foot first. Heel to toe turns on back chain. So if you just were to stand up yourselves later on and push down with your heel, feel your hamstring, your glutes, and then you push down with your quad and feel your hamstring and glute. Nothing happening here, it's all happening here. All right, so the muscles at the front of the leg are your braking muscles generally, and the ones at the back are your propulsive muscles. Foot's not internally or externally rotated at touchdown. The swing leg is not too far back, so you close the gate at contact. So the stuff I showed you, and I'll show you Christian Taylor, I think, in a second. Guiding principles in programming, keep your means aligned is a rule that I have. So when you ask an athlete to do something in a plyometric space, that's aligned with in speed and forces and stuff with what you're doing in the gym, what you're doing in running sessions and any actual event jumping. So you're not doing fast plyometrics and double leg squats to bum to the ground in the gym and stuff at the same time. You get stuff aligned with what you're doing. Consider those criteria, the relationship between the activity, the speeds being asked for, the method of contact on the ground, the range and direction of the movement, ground contact times, and mode of contraction, which is eccentric, concentric, and the impulse involved. Now it's not working for me again, Blair. Oh, I have one more slide. Oh, I had one more slide. There you go. Well, we can get this one to work. Can we get this one to work? That's Christian Taylor's the film I took at World Championships 2015. It's just, I just kind of threw it on there. Oh, that's the wrong one. You got the wrong one, Blair. At World Championships, I don't know. Sorry?
Press F5.
F5.
And I'll bring it back up to the big screen.
Oh, there we go. It's happening. So his acceleration is not very good, but his posture coming into hop takeoff is excellent. His takeoff position, he has a penultimate stride, which is heel to toe. And then he hits the takeoff board in almost the identical position that we ask a long jumper to hit the takeoff board at. Right, shoulder over hip over swing leg knee. And I'll just see if I can play with this while we're going. See the penultimate? People say that it doesn't happen in triple jump. See the toe up? And he's hit there almost the same position as a long jump takeoff as well. So he's not hitting like many of our triple jumpers are hitting the ground. Split out here with the swing leg a mile behind, which then provides massive braking to forward speed as they come through. That was 18:21. All right. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Do we have
Thank you. Sorry to drag you over time.
For the rest of the group, we talked about afterwards last time. When do you suggest you would take people into eccentric training in the gym?
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes, we don't start the year with eccentric training, even though this time of the year almost our entire strength program is eccentric exercises. So we don't start until January sometime. By that time, we've been going since August or September, and we've done the normal eccentric, concentric movements, and we've been using 6 reps normally we use in that phase. And then we gradually condition the athlete until they get up to relatively high loads. So they get, and then we move to eccentric. I'm trying to think of the loads we were using, Andrew, off the top of my head. But we move, well, generally once they're above body weight in anything they're doing, and our squatting stuff, they're generally doing something in the region of, the girls are around 100 kilos and the boys around 120, 130. Then we will move to eccentric stuff and we'll start to overload. So with eccentric training, you can lift significantly more loads. We'll spend a little bit of time on hypertrophy. So we might spend a 6-week block then on hypertrophy with eccentric training, because eccentric training actually provides greater hypertrophy than eccentric concentric. And then we will reduce the number of reps to 3 as we're approaching the competition season. Mid-February or so, we start to look at the more important stuff, and then we'll continue with that through to the championship. So they could lift on Tuesday. They didn't this week because of difficult and interrupted week, but they could lift a full load in a gym on Tuesday and still be poppy like this on Saturday. It doesn't slow you down. Right? What it does is improve the stiffness of the muscle tendon complex. The stuff that makes you faster is the plyometric activities, those things that recruit.
Joey, how long is the eccentric contraction when you're lifting? How many seconds?
We use a longer period, so we'll use around about 3 to 4 seconds in the preparation phase and hypertrophy phase, and we'll drop that to 2 to 3 seconds during competition phase. So that is weight in that position, 1,000, 2,000, 3, and then we lift the weight up for the athlete. So we have 2 spotters, one on each end of the rack. The rack is set up so that they can't fall back. They're standing on one leg. They have a bar here so that they can't lose the bar behind. If they lose the bar behind, drop it, they'll break their leg, and that's the finish of them. But in a safety rack, a safety squat rack, we use those sorts of loads, those times. I'm not sure that it makes a difference. So the research that's just coming out now, the research reviews, is suggesting that you'll get a better result in terms of muscle tendon stiffness with slower activities, not faster ones. So even though it's going well, we were into a space that we hadn't been before. So what will we do now? Maybe we just should shorten it up. So we shortened Nars up in 2019 when she ran 11.3. So we shortened the drop up down. She was squatting. She was eccentrically squatting 160 kilos. Body weight would be 55, I think.
To what kind of depth?
90 degrees at the hip and the knee. So
That's with one leg.
there, on one leg, yeah. And many others.
Only for 1 week.
Sorry?
Once a week.
Once a week, twice a week. Yeah. So we separate our lifting sessions by 72 hours. We run 2 3-day cycles. We jump, lift, and run, and then we repeat that cycle again for the rest of the week. Yeah.
How many eccentric exercises are you doing? You mentioned the single leg squat, the eccentric single leg squat.
We do a reverse. We do Nordics.
Yep.
We do a reverse Nordic for rec fem. We do calf, eccentric calf. Eccentric hip flexor, so there's a machine that loads up and then you have to resist the movement, and posture and stuff is really important. But there's been a fair bit of stuff in the research showing that hip flexion is important to sprinting speed. So,
Do you do seated and standing calves or just?
We do standing calf and we do some seated stuff as well for our jumpers. Yeah. You've got to be careful load-wise once you get into the season and you're running fast and jumping, how much load you've got in the gym. You know, so how many, we might start off with doing 3 sets or 2 or 3 sets and a set or 2 of seated. We get into the season and that becomes like 2 sets of standing, because the amount of work. The same with, we do 2 sets of 4 Nordics. There are lots of variations, and I've had some research done on this. 2 sets of 4 is fine. If you want to do one day of Nordics in a week because you're competing on the weekend, then your first day you'll maintain fascial length and eccentric strength in hamstring if you do one day of that, so 2 sets, provided it's weighted. So 2017, we're overseas with Henry Frayne. We had a protocol for Nordics. We only do it 1 day a week, and then we compete on the weekend. And he tore a hamstring. Mind you, he jumped 2 days apart. He shouldn't have. But he tore a hamstring anyway, and we think he shouldn't have torn it. So we went back and looked at it. I had these guys, I'm lucky to get people to look at these things, and they found that you get lengthening of fascicles, you get shortening of fascicles if you did Nordics only 1 day a week. After you've lengthened them through 2 days a week, they'll actually shorten again if you only do 1 day a week. And then we tried it. They did a couple of groups. And they did one group which had weighted Nordics, and a group that were using weighted Nordics were able to maintain fascicle length. And that's just one of the things that will contribute to reducing the rate of injury. It's not the only thing. Hamstring strength is important. It shows around about a 50% reduction compared to people who don't use the exercise in terms of injury risk, but it's not the only thing. It's the technical side of your running, it's your posture, it's your pelvic position, it's recovery, regeneration, it's all sorts of things it's a complex thing, the injury minefield. Hey?
Flexibility. Contribution in injury risk as well as the other things.
Well, I think flexibility is really important in young athletes when you're bringing them through, but we don't do very much stretching. There isn't much, the research is showing that stretching doesn't improve flexibility, basically. And so, people were dropping,
I was just going to say, what do you do with kids with positive Bacon score? Now, hypermobile, do you load them through their range of motion, or do you actually try and reduce that range of motion in the gymnasium?
Good question. I would say you'd probably try and, if the hypermobility is a problem, you'd probably try and reduce it a little bit and tighten it up.
Joint stiffness is my goal, and when they've got positive all over the place. How do you minimise that?
Well, you can reduce the range of movement. That'll shorten the muscle up. But I don't know whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing. Depends what you're doing and what the forces involved are, etc. You almost can't play too much with a body. The body has some natural things that maybe you shouldn't mess with. Mitchell Watt, I remember, had a shocking lumbar lordosis. Mitchell used to walk like this, walk like this, on his toes, and a bit like Ash Maloney. And he had this terrible lumbar lordosis, and I took him to Shane Lemke. And just after he started, I said, "Have a look at his back, Shane. What do you think we should do with this? He looks terrible." I reckon that's his first point of injury. And Shane said, "Don't touch it. Leave it alone. Don't do anything with it." And he didn't do anything to change he never had a back injury in his entire career. We brought in, those machines are Pilates machines. So we got a guy trained in Pilates. What's your biggest risk factor? Pilates. So we brought in somebody train the physio that we're using. We had all the athletes, the good athletes, turn up to 2 sessions per week to do Pilates for an hour in the morning. And they said, the Pilates guy said, you take out all your other back strengthening exercises because they turn on the global muscles, and we just got to turn on all these smaller muscles in here. We had the worst year of back injuries ever. Everyone got a back injury except Mitchell Watt. And so that's the year that Henry Frayne got his really bad back injury. So we went back to using our normal back strengthening program. So we do overhead squats and we do some other stuff for backs. I don't know what else do we do eccentrically, Andrew, you can think of? Oh yes, you're saying the other. So yeah, we do a quad. So 2 up and a 1 down with a quad extension. So out there, not to fully lock knee, and then down again. And that's, again, it's quite heavy.
Is that with a band?
No, it's with a weight. It's in a leg extension machine. Yeah.
You were talking about stretching before, Gary. You said research shows, and then you stopped and didn't say what the research showed about stretching.
What was I talking about?
stretching?
Stretching, yeah, the research was showing that back 2000, era of 2000, that stretching was irrelevant and people shouldn't be stretching, certainly shouldn't be stretching pre-competition because it takes the tone out of muscles. It takes the tone out of the muscle, so the muscle will be sends it to sleep a bit. It's like long, slow warm-ups that we used to do in the old days, you know. We used to run 3 miles or 5 miles for a warm-up, and then we do 40 minutes of stretching, you know, and then we do a training session after that. So yeah, it affects, the research showed that it didn't improve flexibility, but then, you know, I'm not stupid. I go to the gymnastics, look at the gymnastics program at the AIS and look at the people stretching, the poor young gymnasts, and say, well, forced stretching probably does improve range of movement and would improve flexibility. Yeah. But it's mostly, flexibility mostly comes from the movement patterns that you have, that you adopt. So the more you run, the more flexible you become, basically, or do other activities as well. So no stretching pre-training, stretching after training for sure, right? So everybody stretches, and you can do sustained stretching after training. Of course, we want to take the tone out of muscles after a training session. Right? So triggering and other bits and pieces like that. Yeah.
Gary, just one last question. Encouraging Santine, what are your thoughts on combining plyometrics and traditional weight exercises in one session?
Yes, we do some of that. So we do our weight training. We do an exercise like a standing step up or a single leg squat, and then we follow that with a box jump or a series of short bounds in like 4 bounds or so into we've got an indoor pit. So we use some of those activities. It's a bit like activation, they used to call it, or neural activation in the old days, where you did a weight activity, you did a weight training activity, and then you did something explosive afterwards. So we actually do combine that in our strength training sessions. That's a part of what we do, part of the session. We don't do it with every single exercise. We become like, so we do it with the main exercises, the 2 major lift leg or glute exercises. Now we've looked at what might be relevant to what. I'm not here to talk about weight training, but what might be relevant to what. A step up, a single leg step up, where you have the heel of the toe of the back foot in line with the heel of the front foot, and you stand up vertically without any of this stuff going on, is probably a better exercise for top speed running than a squat. A squat is very much a glute exercise, and you need the glute as well, but the glute exercises, which is the back foot up, is more probably related to acceleration, maybe some of the contact stuff on the ground, but the forces in top speed running are mainly vertical, right? They're mainly vertical. So who knows? We use both of those exercises as part of our training. You know, and you need good glute strength for that extension, as you saw, you know, Franny doing a standing long jump or some of those other activities.
So can I just ask if you've noticed, because a lot of athletes haven't had access to gyms, and so they've had to modify their training, and one of the modifications has been not as much loading. Has there seemed to be any increase in reporting of injuries because of that modification that's happened during COVID?
I would think that could be a product of that, but it doesn't apply to the ones that we deal with, because they had weights to take home once they shut the gym down. They only shut us down for 8 weeks or 10 weeks or something like that, Andrew. And then so Andrew got gym stuff around to all our jumpers in that period of time. But strength training plays a significant role in injury prevention, I'm sure. There's muscle structure, you know. whether things are long or how strong they are, is all influenced by that. So.
There's an ongoing study, football they're doing, so you might get some results for that coming up. Do we have any final questions?
Is it AA's policy not to do weights for kids under 18?
I haven't read the policy.
Is that wrong?
So okay, so if we're starting, say, an Annie Maguire that comes to me at 17, right? So the reason, and an Oscar Myers. So the first year they're there, we don't put a weight on their shoulders. So they haven't had a weight on their shoulders the first year. They've done the same exercises as everyone else, but without loading them through the spine. So we make sure that they're stable and then they're technically good. They do box jumps and other bits and pieces in the gym. So they've got good technical positions, no weights on the shoulder. I don't see any detriment in their performances across that period of time. Both of those athletes continue to improve without loading them up. And it's only, we've had more rapid improvements this year. So, you know, Oscar's gone from 21 or 22 to 25, and Annie's gone from 19 or 20 to 49 or something like that, because we've started to lay a bit of strength down. Yeah. So that didn't occur until the second year. And then we kind of had this policy we followed with Andrew about, you know, okay, we'll go to, in the next 6-month period, we'll go to body weight, you know, and then that we didn't go beyond body weight in that next season, and then beyond that period. So they're in their third year now. And now I think Annie's maybe 120 or something like that, 120 kilos, and Oscar's about 130 or 140 kilos. Whereas the senior jumpers would be able to move 180 to 200 without too many problems. In either a step up or a...
Oscar used to come to the gym with me, like he's
Yeah.
225, I jumped now, but he came in the gym, I think, the end of year 11 for him.
Yeah.
And then I think the heaviest we went was the bar. And we did that all through year 12. I think he was 18 in year 12, and he might have got up to about 60 kilos on his step up by the end of it. And then after that, 19, we started to, we didn't push that.
He's still 19. He doesn't turn 20 until November.
20
So
November.
he's not junior, but he's
And
young.
He'll do a step up, 130 or whatever, but, the Henry Frames and TTs and Billy Conleys and these kids, they'll do 180, 200.
Yeah.
Still, they've got another 30% in strength-wise.
Yeah, strength is the easiest thing to get. I want to say, in terms of, you know, building an athlete, it's probably the easiest thing, and it's best if you can just build it like that, because it isn't these kids. It's not their legs that won't be able to tolerate the load, because they're all. That's why they're in this sport. They're really quite powerful and strong in this area. It's other areas they've got, you know, it's backs and other things that you're likely to cause an issue with, and so you need to just be careful, just to go like this, small steps in loading kids. All right.
I'll direct you to the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association's guidelines for youth and adolescents as well. I can send that through for you. They've got a really clear plan for when athletes ready, starting with body weight right up to using influence. That certainly can be done for athletes under 18 if they're able to complete those prior exercises with the correct.
And it's difficult for coaches, I know, because coaches will come to me and say, well, should I start my athlete on weight training? So, you know, and if they're 14 or 15, I said, well, you can, but there's really not much benefit to it. But all their opposition are doing it. All the other kids are doing it. You know, so it's like distance running community. You know, these are the kilometres, these are the distances that you should contain your athletes to, and the reps and stuff that you should contain. But what about the guys down the road here? You know, they're running 15k, and you know they're 12 years old, and you know they're running hills, and they're doing all this other massive amount of training, and they're beating my kids. So it's I guess trying to educate people, trying to be smart about what you do and trying to convince them that it's really, many of those, I know that some of the coaches that do those sorts of programs with the distance athletes, I never ever see them coaching a senior athlete. They coach all the Australian junior champions, record holders and everything else, and they'll all tell you, oh, my kids, only trains twice a week, it's hardly doing anything. They all sit around talking to one another like this. I've actually worked in schools with one of these guys. I've heard him say that trained only twice a week. This kid, he was an Australian record holder, he trained twice a day. He trained twice a day at our school. It's futile, like Henry Frame, when he came at 19 or 20 or so like that, like he hadn't done any, he'd done lots of plyos with Vasily, but he'd never done any real weights or much running or anything. So.
With weights, I found it more important with the developing female athletes than the males, because the males get testosterone and everything grows anyway.
Yep.
Most females have this tough 12 to 18 months, when obviously estrogen kicks in, their body shape changes, they go from being a tomboy to being a woman. And that's a very difficult time, transitional time for the female jumpers.
Yeah.
And usually disappointment, that they get slower, they get heavier, they go from jumping 11 metres to jumping 10s
yep.
in that 12 to 18 months, and getting them into the gym I found has been the solution in a sense.
Yes, because the girls mature earlier than the boys. They're 1 to 2 years ahead of the boys at those ages. So in terms of maturity, body maturity, so they can start earlier. But yeah, it's horses for courses. There are decisions that coaches have to make. You have to make the best decision as you see it, based on your judgment. And so long as you've got that understanding of load and managing those things, then you make the best judgment you can, make the best call.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, mate.